just to welcome everybody to today's session. My name is Lisa Katanak. I'm the Head of Learning for the Local Government Capacity Centre here at Homes England. So I'm delighted to welcome you to today's session. This is part of a 2-week programme of knowledge sharing on a number of topics which we know of interest to you and will help with housing and regeneration delivery. Today's event is all about community priorities, making better places, looking at the Pride in Place research in particular that was conducted by the Northern Housing Consortium. Just to give you a bit of context, the next slide, if the slides are up on the screen, is around the local capacity centre and the learning programmes that we offer. We've just got a summary here of what the capacity centre offers, and then the next slide just gives some detail of the different tools that are available through the learning Local Government Capacity Centre. Alongside the learning programme that's running at the moment, you can access recordings from our previous programmes on our YouTube channel, and we also have the Housing Information Hub where you can access some new homes fact sheets and a capacity analysis tool to help with assessing capacity within your organisation. So if I can just have the contents slide, goes over what we're going to cover today. We've got 2 panel sessions coming up, one around the partners that are involved in Pride in Place and one on delivering the Pride in Place work. And then, as I said, we'll finish with a Q&A at the end before I draw the session to the close with some further polls. But before that, I'm going to hand over to our first presenter, Liam from the Northern Housing Consortium, who will start the session with an overview of views from northern communities.
Great, thank you, Lisa, and thanks to colleagues at Homes England for giving us the opportunity today to talk about our research and Pride in Place views from northern communities. I think the first thing I'll say is this is based on obviously the work of the Northern Housing Consortium, so it is geographically tied to the north of England, but we think there's transferable lessons, so it's a great opportunity to speak to colleagues nationally today. I think as a good example, yesterday the NHC held its Northern Housing Summit, and at that session we had Create Streets involved, who do a lot of work around design in the built environment, and they actually mentioned in relation to our Pride in Place work, the similarities to what they're hearing in their work internationally, whether that's some of the themes we'll be touching upon today around how a local community can kind of celebrate its area, this idea of heritage, this idea of bringing cultures together as well, all tied up in how we empower residents to play sort of as full a role as possible. So this isn't about one area, whether in this country or internationally, but some sort of universal human values really, and how we can act on those. I'll be talking through that research, a little bit about the methodology, a little bit about the key findings, the context of where our participants came to this idea of Pride in Place, and then also some of their recommendations, whether that's to organisations like housing associations or local government or indeed regional government as well. So next slide, please. And again. Thanks. So for the uninitiated, the Northern Housing Consortium is a membership organisation representing housing providers in the north of England, so housing associations and ALMOs, but also a kind of a key USP of ourselves that we're proud of is the involvement of our local authority members as well, whether that's stock owning local authorities or indeed strategic planning authorities. We do a lot of work on broad housing issues, challenges and opportunities as they are pertinent to the north of England and together, so bringing together social housing but also challenges around the private rented sector as well in planning and regeneration to very much make ourselves, we hope anyway, to be the voice of housing in the north. This work was conducted in partnership with Live Housing Group, Blackpool Coastal Housing, Carbon Homes, Yorkshire Housing and MSV Housing as well. Next slide. So the background of this research is very much this idea of Pride in Place as a source of community cohesion and social capital, and the ability of fostering that pride and that belonging in local areas as a tool of empowering communities, but also reducing inequalities as well, whether that's at the local level or indeed regionally and nationally. I suppose the elephant in the room in terms of sort of the words and the rhetoric we're using here is that this began life very much as a response to a government agenda, a government that we don't necessarily have anymore, but we felt that this was a useful piece of work as it would be speaking to themes that any government, irrespective of political party, would be looking to deal with, whether that's in terms of sort of the social fabric of communities, as well as the physical regeneration of the built environment, and how those two issues interact with each other at the local level very much. I think for sort of planning or sort of broader policy colleagues on the call today as well, I think it relates to placemaking and regeneration, and this idea of what the academic Patsy Healy called the social relations of everyday life. So with our residents and their communities, the different stakes that they have in their local area as places where they live, work, and hopefully spend some of their leisure time as well. And also thinking about this idea that really life is hard work and can be hard work, whether that's sort of surviving economically, managing your household, providing support to family, friends, and neighbours, trying to enjoy yourself while you're doing all this as well. And then when we think about neighbourhoods and places more generally, some places are kind of helpful to everyday life and others aren't, whether that's sort of in navigating the area or indeed navigating the sort of the public service ecosystem that underpins that area. And this work kind of got to grips with how people interacted with their areas and what made life easier and what made life harder as well. Next slide. Thank you. So just to kind of go through the methodology, we initially held conversations with our project partners about the areas that they represent, but the main body of this work was built around deliberative workshops with both social housing and private rented sector residents. So 43 residents were involved all in, across workshop 1 and workshop 2. The first workshops were held across the north, and we tried our best to make sure that each area represented a different typology. So we were kind of understanding the views of different communities, how they differed, but also those common values and common themes as well. So workshops were held in Blackpool, so capturing that coastal element, Moss Side, obviously outer skirts of sort of Manchester, and how that sort of plays within the sort of the broader Greater Manchester area, Prescott, so Knowsley and Merseyside, Benwell on the outskirts of Newcastle, and Skipton as well, so bringing in a rural element. And from those areas, workshop participants certain workshop participants anyway, were invited back to Leeds, where together with colleagues from their housing association or the local government, or indeed civil servants we had involved, or those from the sort of the community and charitable sector as well, we all came together to co-produce some key pillars of Pride, and then also some area action plans that could be implemented. So very much taking across sort of these broad questions of what do you like about your area, what you don't like. If you had some funding yourself as a community, what would you want to do with it, and what the role is for different organisations in making that happen. So next slide, please. Thank you. And we'll go through to key findings. So overall, despite residents citing many issues of relating to where they live that could be improved upon, I think the key part of our starting point on this journey was that residents were very proud of the area that they lived in, and that Pride was already existing and wasn't something that needed to be sort of reproved or sort of built upon, but was sort of there to be used. Despite that pride, many felt powerless in the decision making as it related to their local area. And then thinking about the specific factors which contribute to feelings of pride, whether that's positively or negatively, there's lots of different areas and themes that people touched upon. But through the process of that work, we grouped that together on ideas around access to basic services, a sense of community in decision making, and the local environment. Next slide. In terms of context, our participants talked about tangible and intangible aspects of their pride. So that kind of included things like unique shops and sort of restaurants, little places with that local connection. So whether that was local entrepreneurs or locally owned businesses, or those that sold products relating to the area, whether sort of fresh produce or indeed little sort of knickknacks and little sort of trinkets related to the area. Heritage and history, understandably, came out across the area, across the sort of the workshops. That was both in terms of heritage, so thinking about industrial pasts and industrial heritages, but also going further back as well, maybe in more sort of rural places, so thinking about sort of castles and abbeys and priories, and how all that kind of contributed to pride. The local landscape and that sort of perception of natural beauty in an area and how that could be sort of made the best of. Intangible aspects were ideas around identity and how history was tied up into that, the connection of people and how they related to each other in that community setting was a huge theme, and then also as well how that all kind of came together in different sort of hyper-local customs that were sort of their own language, their own way of being in an area. Next slide. Having said that, pride or worked sort of another way in terms of negative aspects hampering pride, and that kind of came out in sort of feelings of place stigma and how that sort of upset people or kind of created a perception of insiders and outsiders, and this feeling of people being proud of their area but just feeling like outsiders just didn't really understand it, and that pride very much contributed to this idea of wanting to improve their area. Next slide. And then related to decision making, people felt this sort of sense of disconnection, this idea that decision makers were no longer present in the community, that there was a lack of resident engagement, and then also decision makers were not necessarily to be trusted. And together that compounded a view that sort of local decision making wasn't working as it should. And what I would say in relation to sort of the session today and attendees here today, I think what came out in the work, there was an element of local democracy and how the sort of the local state interacted with people in terms of the role of councillors and local government being physical in areas, but also as well, it was about sort of community governance and the ability of people to sort of be involved in their areas as well. So that related into sort of planning and consultations, how consultations were conducted, includes, and then broader ideas of how residents could be involved, not just in that kind of process, but more generally stewardship of their area too. Next slide. And then in terms of our key findings, I mentioned before, we grouped those into buckets around basic services, community and decision making, and the state of the local environment. I think for this, I think in the time since the work, we've flipped that, or I have anyway, flipped this on its head as a way of understanding how residents sort of perceive their areas. So a lot in here isn't necessarily groundbreaking. I feel colleagues on the call will understand the components of sort of what makes a great place to live in this idea of a thriving community. But I think it's just an interesting way of understanding how people kind of organize their priorities. So certainly around the local environment, people wanted to see their communities reflected in their neighborhood, and people talked about this idea of the past, present, and future of communities. The past was kind of making most of that history and heritage. So these landmark buildings, these excellent open spaces, how could they be used to bring people together and to celebrate those areas? The present was this idea of stewardship, and then different cultures existing in communities. How could we bring people together to share different cultures and customs? And then also the future as well, highlighting a role for young people. Green spaces were incredibly important to participants, and they felt that there was an opportunity to not just maintain green spaces, but really make the most of these as public spaces, linking to this idea of encouraging neighborliness. So neighborliness and social relations were incredibly important to participants. So whether that was in terms of open spaces or heritage buildings, people saw opportunities for social infrastructure and opportunities to kind of bring people together around neighbourhood issues, or indeed just coming together around leisurely opportunities as well. In terms of decision making, our participants saw a clear role and could kind of understand where national and local government, so the state, came in. They understood a role for community groups, but they also understood a role for themselves, or wanted a role for themselves within that, linked to this idea of the pride as a driver for their involvement of so this community ownership of placemaking priorities in terms of sort of organising and delivering. How could we create a space for them to be involved, alongside a civic sector as well, in this idea of different sort of levels of community and involvement? How could all this work together? But what I would say is, in terms of those first two elements, they were the sort of people wanted to see built in their areas, but they could only be built upon the strong foundations of public services, access to basic services, what they saw as the foundations. So decent, affordable homes, community safety, and employability aspect as well, how their environment supported their health and well-being. There was very much an idea when thinking about the governance of their areas. They really wanted to see a return to sort of in-person neighbourhood management as well. This bringing people together physically in their community. And then also as well, when thinking about their area, drawing together the different strands of sort of national priorities, almost, that they can sort of see in the news. So reducing inequalities, whether nationally, regionally, or locally, the sort of the importance of climate change and what net zero meant for their homes in terms of sort of retrofitting homes, but also what that meant for the natural environment that they find themselves in as well. And then also this concept of leveling up, which has snuck itself into the presentation. I thought I'd managed to cleanse the slides of references to past agendas, but these ideas will become future agendas. I would certainly hope, anyway. Next slide. And then just building on those core themes, as I mentioned, through the workshops, our participants tried to think about what their priorities were, and then as a body, the NHC, we try to think about how our members and local authorities work together on those areas and kind of opportunities for improvement. So, and I think these link to what we're probably considering the key takeaways from this session. So making the most of heritage and green spaces. Our residents involved in the work definitely felt more could be done to ensure the heritage and culture of communities was reflected in the built environment. They highly valued their green spaces, but they did not meet the full potential. And then also this idea of social infrastructure as well, and how our green and public spaces can support neighbourliness. For the Northern Housing Consortium, we've been working with our members on getting out into neighbourhoods and really understanding the people that we represent, different cultures, different communities. We've recommended acting on the recommendations, and this is a report I could maybe link to in the chat, Unlocking the Power of Green Spaces. That was done by Nature North with the backing of the National Trust. And then maybe more for sort of our local authority members, thinking about sort of publicly owned land and what actions local people could do in their areas. And that can go from sort of wide open public spaces and opportunities for sort of parks, allotments, and back alleys as well. This is all featured in the report. And there's also an opportunity to go further, seeking out partnerships with some bodies I've just mentioned, like the National Trust, or indeed Historic England, and the role they can play around heritage and bringing different cultures together. Taking active steps to upgrade neighbourhoods with a maybe more explicit involvement of residents, but there's also an opportunity for local art and culture to play a role there as well, and that is often an opportunity to bring in young people. And then also providing education and sort of inspiration themselves on the possibility of green spaces. So providing a bit of capacity, a bit of resource to communities to think differently about their areas, going beyond maintenance to thinking about biodiversity and this opportunity for sort of urban farming, or going back to sort of the historical idea of sort of allotments and how we can make more of those. Next slide. And then in resident involvement in planning and that sort of community governance aspect. You've heard me talk about throughout this presentation, this idea of sort of disempowerment in decision making in the local area, and how that could be sort of improved upon, and whilst doing that, in turn improving trust between organisations and residents. So we see there's definitely a role for sort of sharing and adopting best practices around taking tenant views into account. This is very much related to the regulator of social housing community standards. So it's thinking about legislation and commitments that we already have in place and how these ideas can kind of be filtered through that kind of work. And then also as well, thinking about decision making that's closer to residents, and then in relation to the planning process, really kind of tying in this idea of community stewardship once initiatives have been sort of implemented. So this could be sort of participatory budgeting or citizens juries, for example, and really being proactive in interactions with community groups and in the wider voluntary sector, thinking about how those in attendance today can be sharing capacity and resource, or indeed just guidance and mentoring as well. And finally, next slide. This idea of investing in the foundations, of course, easier said than done. But the core part of all of this was, as much as people had a desire to be involved in their areas, they were clear that we needed a starting point for quality of life, and that was access to the fundamentals, housing, decent housing in safe neighbourhoods, and also as we go further into the report, health and well-being, employability plays a role in that as well. We already do this, or we at least try to do this within sort of constraints, really, in terms of cooperating with relevant partners, but also being proactive in establishing relationships that can sort of facilitate this work. But we can also kind of maybe what this work is a community telling us to maybe prioritise or do our best to be making the most of our areas alongside residents, so supporting their own efforts to transform spaces, innovative use of partnerships and funding that can do this idea of making the most of areas, but also bringing empty homes or sort of derelict areas back into sort of community minds and use, recommitting to a physical presence in communities. So whether that's establishing new hubs or using available assets already. And then finally, as well, this idea of perhaps nurturing a sort of a cross-tenure neighbourhood association, a forum, supported by housing providers, resident representation with clear open links into other sort of local stakeholders as well. Next slide. So that's enough from me in terms of giving an overview of the work. I would just now like to introduce, just building on what Lisa said at the beginning of the session around how our remaining panel will kind of bring these ideas to life. Our first two panelists are Tom Wild, Director of Community and Business Planning at Live Housing Group, and Natalie Samuels, Social Investment Team Leader at MSV Housing Group, two partners very much involved in the work, and they're going to share some of their reflections on how the research has kind of helped them think about their areas and the work that they do in their areas. And next slide. And finally, as well, some good practice from the NHC's local authority members. Not necessarily, these are sort of case study examples of things that haven't necessarily been inspired by our work, but are really an important reminder that, as I say, there's nothing necessarily new here. It's just a helpful sort of framework to think about how communities perceive of their areas. And the good work that Julie McCartney at Sunderland City Council, Joanne Bartholomew at Kirklees, and Arian Malloy at Preston City Council, they are sort of using the themes of Pride and Place in their work, and they're already delivering on those themes. So a helpful reminder that this work sort of exists in different pockets. It's just thinking about things holistically. So at that point, I'll pass over to Tom. Thank you, everyone, for their patience while I spoke.
Okay, thanks, Liam, and good morning, everybody. So I'm Tom Wild, Director of Community and Business Planning at Live Housing Group, and I'm just going to cover a bit of a following from Liam in terms of our reasons for getting involved in the research, some brief reflections on the research and the results and the recommendations that it provided, and then a bit of a high-level overview as to how we're using that research and putting it into practice. If we could have the next slide, please. Sorry, the next one as well. So quickly, some background for those who might not know Live. So we're an independent housing association based in Knowsley. Medium-sized housing association. We've got approximately 13,000 homes across the Liverpool City region, predominantly in Knowsley. We were the original stock transfer from Knowsley, but we do have kind of pockets of development outside of Knowsley across the Liverpool City region. So we serve about 28,000 customers at the moment. active development pipeline. So last year we built 270 new homes, and this year we're on track to reach 300. And as I say, that's across a number of neighbouring boroughs outside of Knowsley as well. For those who don't know Knowsley, we're kind of on the eastern reaches of the Liverpool City region. So heading toward in the direction of Manchester. Got over 480 colleagues, and as you can see there, we're committed to creating a positive impact through quality of our homes, training, and initiatives that foster thriving communities. So obviously this research was of interest to us for those reasons. Could I have the next slide, please? So in terms of our involvement in this research, we've already got a wide-reaching programme of customer engagement and involvement, but if we're completely honest, the focus of that previously was primarily on our relating to specific areas of service delivery or the development of our policies and strategies, and where we maybe weren't as strong was on our approach to place-based engagement and really getting out into individual communities and just listening to our customers and understanding what matters most to them in that community, as opposed to kind of being driven by specific initiatives or services that we were interested in receiving feedback on. So in terms of our involvement in this research, we ran a large-scale customer survey in early 2023, which included a whole range of questions for customers around our services and the area they live in. But that included questions about customer satisfaction with the area they live. Based on that, and I've seen there's been a question in the chat about how we selected participants, which we might want to come back to later as well. But based on that, we identified there was a specific area of Knowsley where our customers had stated they were least positive about their local area. And that was on the fringes of Prescott, which is one of the 4 town centres within our geographic area. So we decided to focus on this kind of specific area to get a better understanding of why that was the case, and worked with Northern Housing Consortium to select participants. But we actually followed on from that survey. So we contacted people in that area who had responded, both satisfied and dissatisfied, to make sure we got a balanced view. And we asked them if they'd be interested in taking part in this further research, which was great in terms of feeding back to those customers and saying, you've already responded to this, we'd like to investigate that further with you and understand your viewpoint more. So we got really high levels of engagement in that, which was really positive. Could I have the next slide, please? So in terms of just some reflections on the overall research, Liam's already referred to some similarities in the findings of this research and other studies. And I'd agree with kind of some of the stuff that Liam said. It doesn't necessarily tell us anything revolutionary or new. And I think anyone who reads it, they'll see a lot of similarities in the work that they're already involved in, or discussions they've had, or considerations they might already have in place. But what it does provide is a really useful framework and evidence base to support us in prioritising where we should focus our efforts. And there are some potentially kind of snippets of new stuff in there that maybe we weren't actively thinking about yet as well. In particular, I think it's really useful in that it clarifies what matters most to customers and residents, and it's directly driven from their viewpoint. And it's really useful in defining the role that different partners have to play in this issue. So housing associations, local government and national government. So really useful in terms of the distinction of how we can all contribute. And for us, placemaking is much broader than our approach to development, obviously. So we're using the findings to inform our work across various areas of the business. So it's a really useful framework for ourselves internally, but also discussions with partners. Helps to reinforce the importance of some of the work we're already doing, but more importantly, potentially helps to identify areas where we can do more and where we should prioritise our efforts. Can I have the next slide, please? So in terms of how we're using it, as I mentioned, that there's lots of recommendations through this that we'd say we're already doing and we're quite strong on, and I think everyone will spot individual recommendations within the research that helps to just reinforce what they're already doing. So examples for ourselves and many others, I'm sure, will be the work we do around signposting our customers to support, to local services, employment and skills support, collaboration with partners to tackle antisocial behaviour, our range of community investment and social inclusion activities, provision of opportunities and training for young people, and involvement of customers in decision making and how our services are delivered. To that, we kind of did a bit of a gap analysis of the recommendations and looked at within our role what do we feel we're already delivering well and where could we potentially strengthen. Some of the areas we're particularly working on at the moment then Around partnership working, so we've used this research as an evidence base to present to local partners and to support in agreeing the priority areas of focus with those partners. So, as I'm sure you'll all be involved in as well, we're part of kind of the local authority partnership structures. So we presented these findings to the Knowsley Better Together Partnership Board, which is made up of leaders and chief executives from the various partner organisations to help to look at how we can work better together to address placemaking. And then I also attend the Knowsley Stronger Community Steering Group, and we're actively looking at some of the recommendations from this and identifying how can we jointly adopt some of those recommendations. And again, more often than not, it feeds on from work we're already involved in. It potentially just helps to reinforce that priority, or to help us look at kind of how we operate within a wider framework of placemaking recommendations. So some examples, there's already some ongoing work around asset-based community development, and particularly working collectively with those partners around resident-led approaches to identifying and addressing local priorities. And this has really helped to reinforce that and help us to all agree that that should be a priority for us to work on. In terms of the Live Place Standard and placemaking priority, so our development team have been working with the University of Liverpool on this for a number of months to develop a set of place standards that we will use to inform our approach to development. And we fed Pride of Place into that work in terms of the recommendations from it. So like I said, we were working with an academic team from the University of Liverpool. They were looking at a wide range of data and insight in order to inform that. But in terms of what matters to our customers, we fed in the recommendations from this, and it's directly informed that place standard and the priorities that we focus on, in particular, some of the wording and some of kind of the prioritisation we place around well-designed public spaces and well-designed and managed. Quite interestingly, is through the research and the formation of this report that developed from access to public spaces to well-designed and maximised use of public spaces, which was the real key thing we identified, and also access to local services and amenities, which we've explicitly referenced in our placemaking standards. In terms of presence in our communities, again, something we were already looking at, we've recently restructured our customer-facing teams, and that includes increasing the number of housing advisors and an increased focus on visibility within our communities. It's come out through various recommendations and pieces of research recently, including the Better Social Housing Review. That's both so customers can talk to us more easily, that we're more visible and they can access our colleagues when they need to, but also that we have a better understanding of individual customers and the opportunity for customers to talk to housing advisors whenever they need to, and that we're always going to be there. That includes looking at the idea of kind of hubs in coordination with our partners, whether that be a physical asset that's there all the time, or whether it's a regular drop-in, a monthly drop-in where we know that a range of partners will be available and accessible to our customers. And then finally, place-based customer engagement. I've already mentioned that it's one of the areas that we identified we needed to strengthen. We found the findings from this research really valuable, and it's something we're actively looking at the moment, is how can we carry out more place-based engagement, understand what matters to customers within each local area, within our communities, and particularly working with partners such as Knowsley Council to do that, to make sure that we're avoiding any duplication. I'll pass over to Natalie now. That covers it for me. I'll pass over to Natalie and then happy to take any questions at the end.
Thank you, Tom. My name's Natalie. I'm Social Investment Team Leader at MSV Housing. And just following on from what a lot of Tom has said, we're just going to explore some of the example of what we've been doing in Moorside as a result of the outcome. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So I currently work at MSV, and we have what's known as a location called Positive Futures, which is our local skills and employment hub based in Moorside. We cover a lot of different areas, which I'll explore now on the next slide for me, please. So again, a bit about who we are. We manage almost 9,000 homes across 17 different local authorities, with Moorside being the largest anchor-based community that we have. We've been going for over 50 years now. We merged with St Vincent's and Moscare about 7 years ago now, but it's with over 50 years experience from both organisations. So We tend to pride ourselves on being customer focused, being kind, managing expectations, and having a very positive spin on working within the communities that we're serving. So can I go to the next slide, please? More recently, we've taken a focus on to the social value aspect and what we can achieve for our customers in underpinning the corporate strategies, commitments for people, place and performance within MSV. And as a result of this, our aim for social value is to make it easy to understand and be more meaningful and relevant for the customers that we're serving. Measurable, again, making it quantitative and qualitative so that we are able to demonstrate how successful these opportunities are, but also be presented in financial terms for board and etc. Collaborative and sustainable, so making sure that it's shaped by the stakeholders, contractors that we're working with, and focusing on building long-term outcomes and enduring positive and productive relationships that will benefit the communities that we're working in. Next slide, please. So a bit about Positive Futures. So Positive Futures launched about just coming up to 3 years in April, actually. It was a brand new space in Moss Side. It was previously Moss Care's head office, which was redeveloped. And alongside having Positive Futures, it's also got 17 flats that were specifically targeted for care leavers of Manchester who needed a forever home where they could find stability and get comfortable in an environment and start to build on their future life experiences. Fundamentally, the principle of Positive Futures is about skills and employment, but we do have wellbeing initiatives. We have partners come in to deliver on other initiatives in the community, including things like a homelessness prevention hub, a wellbeing perspective, like having a diabetes group that runs from there. So it's offering the space to the local community and partners to deliver support. So the skills development, so the training and educational opportunities to empower people on their career journey. Wellbeing support, again, there's opportunities to do things like sit down exercises, more of a holistic approach in terms of how we support people within the community. Environmental initiatives, so going out and doing walkabouts with neighbourhood officers, engaging tenants about the opportunities with environmental and carbon literacy. And we also seek, for Positive Futures, it's actually a free space for the community and partners to use as well. So there's no cost to it, which, you know, that means we have to seek external funding to support that. But the outcome of having a space where the community can use, which is nice, it's been really beneficial. We've even used it for things like we now have a community drop-in, which is hosted there on a weekly basis, alongside a few other hubs that we have, where we have officers from across the business who are there on that Monday to be able to support tenants through things that they might have concerns around, and that'll be dealt with there and then on the day as an active space where it's open for people to come in and speak. Next slide, please. What we've achieved so far as a result of Positive Futures is we've been able to explore more schoolwork experience, so targeting young people in terms of engagements within the community, because in Moss Side we do see a lot of young people, there's a lot of high schools, and we wanted to make sure we was giving them valuable work experience to support those young people. We've got work clubs that and jobs fairs that we've run as well. The jobs fair we've done in partnership with local community. So we've done it in partnership with the DWP, Manchester City Council, and alongside the local youth centre Powerhouse, where we was able to deliver these jobs fairs, which has seen over 400 people come through the door and access the service for local opportunities. Skills development, so supported the acquisition of over 160 qualifications, sorry, including ESOL, youth work and support in schools. So that's delivering that in partnership with organisations who are qualified to deliver. And work placements provided the more hands-on experience with over 15 individuals through the organisation. So when I say work experience, we wanted to come away from just spending a week, not necessarily engaging in more. We wanted to focus on more hands-on practical activities that they could get involved with. If you could go to the next slide, please. We've also had student internships. So as a part of that, in January 23, we launched with the Manchester College and Pure Innovation, which was targeting young people who had educational healthcare plans. So about finding opportunities for those in the communities that we're serving who might need that extra help, who might need that extra support, and not necessarily think about going to their housing association to find that support. 5 of our experienced operatives volunteered as mentors, providing a supportive environment for these young people, because it was also about making sure we could get the right mentor for that young person. For a complete and realistic experience, we went through the whole recruitment process for them, and as a result of that, those 5 young people really got to grips with how employment gets started, what the recruitment process was, doing risk assessments, onboarding, all that kind of stuff. And over the 12 weeks, they were working in domestic settings, getting experience doing daily tasks, all things that they can now put onto a CV. And we've had 3 of those successfully go on to employment, 2 within MSV and 1 externally through a contractor that we have via the social value that we offer as well. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So this is 2 of the lads that we've had. So they've had their contracts extended and extended further with plans, obviously with a succession plan for a permanent contract soon. So if we could go to the next one. Referring back to the external funding that I mentioned earlier to sustain positive futures, we have secured Strand 2 WEA funding, which has been able to fundamentally support an offer of a community mentor, which is one-to-one, where it doesn't necessarily have to be MSV tenants. This is open to the whole community in terms of having access for CV writing, job applications, support with confidence building, additional financial support, things like that we can help young people with. But it's also, even though we're helping young people, it's open-ended as well. So we've supported over 21 residents into employment, secured employment for more than 6 months out of it. We've secured employment for 13 people for more than 6 months, sorry. I need to increase that number. There's been a lot of CV support over the last year, particularly as we've come more into the WEA funding, and referrals have been massively stepped up as well in terms of what the next steps are for these clients, and making sure that we are able to identify those quickly and sharply so we can make the right referrals onto the appropriate partners. If you could go to the next slide, please. Drop-ins, I mentioned before, something that was feedback from customers, being from an anchor neighbourhood. Customers really wanted to see us on the doorstep, basically, and wanted a space where they could come in, speak to an officer and have their issue raised and resolved as soon as possible. As a discussion of that, we launched the drop-in at Positive Futures about 1.5 years ago now, and we've also launched these in other anchor neighbourhoods that we have where the stock is more significant, including places like Tameside and Stockport. These drop-ins are attended very well. It gives people the opportunity to meet people at the neighbourhood office and meet the lettings officer, meet partners that we have that come in and do sessions. So we had House Exchange this week who came in to talk to people about things like how to go about home swapping, and that was really successful in terms of seeing footfall and engagement and customers wanting more opportunities for partners to come in and offer their services. Next slide, please. Again, this is just a brief outline in terms of the jobs fair and what we do to sort of support the skills and employment within the area of Moss Side. There was more of an opportunity to focus on skills, employment and training based on DWP data and customer focus forums where we were able to get feedback on what people wanted to see within the community. And a jobs fair was something that came out massively in terms of having something that was accessible with local opportunities that people could easily access. So alongside having the jobs fair, we gave people the opportunity to attend CV and confidence building workshops the week before to get them ready for jobs fairs, because although we fully support jobs fairs, there's also an opportunity to get people prepared for a jobs fair. Is their CV up to date? Have they got all the relevant information? Is it the right time for them? What is it that they want to find out at the jobs fair? And those workshops, again, well attended in terms of people getting the information they needed before attending the jobs fair. If we could move on to the next slide, please. Just back to the schoolwork experience offer. So again, going across communities, this one we delivered in Rochdale. So we worked very closely with the Rochdale Islamic School for girls and for boys. So we did 2 sets of work experiences, which gave the young people an opportunity to find out about housing, about things like carbon literacy, environmental aspects of living in your community, how can you help. We've done things with Charlton and Derbyshire High School where we was able to take them to the housing event at I still call it the GMEX, but it's not the GMEX anymore in Manchester. We've also done school jobs fairs where we go down to schools and they'll have young people prepped and ready to do like a fake interview in terms of asking them questions and sort of getting them to think a little bit differently about how an interview might go to break down some of those barriers and build confidence for the future when they leave school. If we could move to the next slide, please. Community group. So we recognised the local need, and our social investment team partnered with St James's Church, which is a local church across the road for us, to launch an initiative around Time to Fly in April 24. So this fundamentally focuses on domestic violence and having a safe space for victims where they could go and not talk about domestic violence, but there was an opportunity there to link in with the church to offer skills again. So we were able to support the church by buying a barista style coffee machine, which we are looking to put potential people on who are engaging in the service on barista style training, for example, to empower the volunteers and members into a supportive environment where they feel comfortable. They would be looking at things like developing food hygiene, health and safety, but it's also coming away from the environment that they're at home and building networks and building friendships, which are more valuable in terms of how somebody can feel when they're living in a domestic violence situation. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So we proactively go into the communities that we're serving and can identify from the residents the opportunities that a community group can have. We've literally set up, in the last few months, I think there's been about 3 more residents groups that we've set up. Fundamentally, we've got a massive one in Moss Side called Crofton Street, which is again a back alley garden, but it's huge and it's previously won awards in terms of how sustainable it is and how we engage tenants. And it sort of fell apart as the transition of people moving happened. And now we've managed to get a strong group of tenants who are engaged in that and trying to rebuild that community garden with support of MSV partners in terms of social value, ensuring that we're getting contractors on site to be able to deliver hands-on support, like being able to provide a skip or being able to provide support doing weeding and things like that. And we also have a kindness fund where we have up to £20,000 a year where we're able to offer up to £1,000 per group to support their community project. and we'll always help out with support with the application and how best to go about that. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So that was just a bit of, I just wanted to touch on some of the things that we've done. Again, just as Tom mentioned before, nothing that we're doing is reinventing the wheel. It's just doing it, I think, for us, in terms of you've just got to get on the ground and get doing it. Me, myself, and MSV were strong on partnerships and how we can we can't do everything on our own. It's about building those partnerships and networks to make sure that we're able to offer the best opportunities for the communities. So like it says on there, if you've got any ideas for future collaborations, then let's connect. Like I said before, we cover over 17 local authorities. Is there an opportunity with you? So my contact details are there, and if you need any more, if you've got any more questions or want any more, then please contact me and I'll be happy to support. Thank you. Handing back to Liam at this point, I don't know. Julie.
Hi, thanks very much. Yeah, I'm Julie McCartney. I'm the Strategic Development Manager for Sunderland City Council. Really pleased to be here today to really share sort of what we're doing in Sunderland. And just as a quick introduction, I think it's really interesting to hear from Liam and the Pride in Place and how perhaps we're following those particular principles and have been for some time. So it's really encouraging to know that we're going along the right lines. So next slide, please. So Riverside Sunderland master plan, for those of you who don't know where Sunderland is, it's that really good football team between Newcastle and Middlesbrough. So that might give you an idea where we are based in the northeast. We launched our Riverside Master Plan, which is our place-based strategy to create a new urban quarter on a fantastic riverside site in the heart of the city. And as you can see from the picture there, it actually overlooks the North Sea as well. So we've got the benefit of coast and country. But this master plan sets out a strong ambition for the future in terms of the regeneration, redevelopment of the city up to about 2035. It was launched in October 2020. And I think really what this does is it culminates into a lot of the commercial and residential projects that we're undertaking to really sort of redevelop and regenerate the city and the economic growth. It's a city like many others, really. It's got many challenges. It's been hollowed out after many decades due to a lack of inward investment. It's got low growth in businesses. Our major sort of employer is Nissan, who's gone from strength to strength. But like many urban cities, we're faced with high levels of poverty, deprivation, poor health outcomes, and high levels of children in need and in care. So really an area that really needed some generation. The inner city itself, while we picked that, it's got a suppressed property market with a lack of high quality new homes and housing choice. And it had little investor sort of appetite for the brownfield development. And I think anybody who knows and who's developing right now will know the complexities around brownfield and the sort of development values around that. But in line with what we're talking about today, prior to the launch of our master plan, we undertook quite a significant sort of community engagement called Imagine in Riverside Sunderland. So a lot of the space that you see there on the photograph was actually vacant land. It was vacant brownfield land. And over the years, the council had acquisitioned and bought up properties on there so that it could actually really enact its master plan itself and would have control on that. So it was really interesting. I looked back over the consultation that we undertook and that community engagement. There's 6 core messages that came out of that. Firstly, it was around connectivity and the relationship between the whole of the city centre and Riverside Sunderland itself and how we'd connect those communities. But again, what people told us was it was about creating a community and not just building homes. So there needed to be a choice of homes, whether to buy or rent. There needed to be the social infrastructure that really sort of backed up that those new communities, whether it be shops, GP surgeries, the infrastructure that sits behind that, the education, schools, etc. And again, we knew that we had a little bit of an outward migration, particularly of younger people in Sunderland. And the message that came back to us was about attracting those talented individuals to retain them within the city, but also to provide opportunities for the local people around affordable workspace, startup businesses, artists, makers, etc. In the middle of that photograph, you'll see there is a green space, a rather large green space, and I'll come on to talk about that, and that is Galleys Gill. It's a huge sort of riverside park, but over the years hasn't been maintained to, to the levels that we would like it to be. It suffers, like most, from antisocial behaviour. It's not a place that people really want to go. So we are in the process of improving that, but massive, healthy area. To the north of the river, where you see the two bridges, that pathway is actually part of the coast to coast. There's a real opportunity to maximise that green space there. So again, another key message was around connecting the different parts of Riverside Sunderland, strengthening walking and cycling across the river. Sorry, not walking across the river, you'd sink, wouldn't you? Was actually sort of, you can see there's a high level bridge that's been put in place, but also about St Mary's Boulevard, that is really a dual carriageway that sort of separates the two parts of the city. So we needed to look at that. And obviously there was strong support for our carbon neutral aspirations as well. Next slide. So this gives you an idea about sort of some of the outcomes that we were looking for under Riverside Sunderland. It's really about trying to double the footfall inside the city centre that would drive the economic growth of the city centre. Again, hollowed out, we're losing businesses and local shops there, so we need to revitalise that area. So the strategy really aims to deliver that 1,000 new homes across 4 new community neighbourhoods that don't currently exist, and you can see them coloured in on the map there. 1 million square foot of offices and workspace that will create up to about 8,000 to 10,000 quality jobs. What's not on here is people might have heard of the Crownworks Studios, which will be developed along further along the riverside, which again would create up to about 10,000 to 15,000 new jobs in the region. So this particular area is surrounded by beautiful parks and public spaces. It's quite a size. It's over 33 hectares with 19.5 hectares of developable land. But it's right at the heart of the city, and it's part of our smart city as well, where we're rolling out 5G network to deliver transformative digital services for residents and businesses. Next slide, please. But all of this can't be done without money. And like most, we've faced a lot of challenges over the years, typical sort of market failure, complexities around brownfield land. But clearly what we have been able to do is in the last 5 years, we've attracted £650 million of inward investment into the area, which is quite significant. And bearing in mind, 2020 was the start of COVID. We had Brexit in between all of that as well, so that it's quite some achievement to attract that. It didn't come without its pain. 20% of that is public sector grant, with over 45% as private investment as well. But I think one of the things that we did was we didn't let COVID put us off, and we pushed on with the master plan to really deliver that. So I'm going to give you a flavour for all of the projects that we're actually delivering at the moment. And anybody who's been to Sunderland will see that the skyline is just full of cranes at the moment and hoarding, where there's lots of transformation taking place. Next slide. So Vaux Housing is the first of our new sort of community neighbourhoods to be created. It's 133 homes, very much sort of a mixed development, mostly PRS at the moment, with some open market sale on there. It's a very, very bespoke design with spacious homes, but really what this is doing is setting the benchmark and standard for the quality of new homes in Riverside and across Riverside. Part of Vaux was a winning design, national. It was launched by government a few years ago, and that was on the Homes of 2030. So this is about an innovative design supporting health and lifestyle of a mixed-age community. That was sort of won by Igloo, Mawson Kerr, Useful Projects and CAST. And this Vaux is currently on site at the moment. We had some stalling because Tolan went into administration, so it delayed us sort of progressing with the site, but it's back on site now and delivering. Next slide, please. Farringdon Row is the next of our community neighbourhoods to be built. We're currently working in partnership with Place First. And actually they will deliver somewhere in the region of 165 new homes, which will be private rent as well. There are 4 sort of medium-sized blocks there, but it has absolutely fantastic location in terms of looking across down the river and across to the sea as well. Next slide, please. Sheepfolds is the largest of our new communities to be developed on Riverside, and this is probably in the region of about 600 new homes. We're currently in the process of procuring a preferred developer for the site and hope to appoint somebody by early 2025. But this area, you can see from there, is actually overlooking the river. It's currently an industrial area where we've had to demolish quite a lot of industrial units there and relocate them. But Sheepfolds will include a mobility hub. One of the things that we are aiming to do on Riverside is to keep the cars on the periphery of the development. So we're building a high quality sort of mobility hub there. So that it would provide lots of the services. It's right next to Network Rail and the metro station, and it would encompass a lot of the sort of local mobility needs of the area. It'll be surrounded by sort of high quality public realm. You'll start to get a sense from the pictures on the left hand side there that there is public realm that will connect the New Way footbridge up to the Stadium of Light, which I'll talk about in a minute. But actually making sure that we had that connectivity around that area was really quite key for us. Next slide. One of our commercial projects, the Yard, was actually completed in 2021. It's a refurbishment of an old police station to create a modern business centre, about 23,000 square feet, and that houses some of our small startup businesses and SMEs in the city. So it's right within the centre of the city itself. Next slide. The Beam, again, was a very bespoke building. It was the first building to be completed on Riverside, Sunderland in 2020, and that offers high quality modern office space as well for small businesses. Our lead sort of anchor tenant in there is Ocado, and the building is probably around about 80–90% full at this point in time. Next slide. City Hall, this is where I live most of my week, and this is the new sort of civic building within the city centre. Completed in 2022, it houses most of our council services, DWP, Gentoo Homes, Sunderland College, registry officers, so it brings a lot of the civic sort of services together under one roof. And when you go in, it's kept a lot of its heritage of the city in terms of its industrial culture as well. So it's won a lot of awards, and it's a really, really nice building to work from in that. Next slide, please. Out the back of sort of City Hall, which you'll see in the right-hand picture, you've got two large buildings there, which are the Maker and Faber buildings. This is funded by Legal & General, and they're just about complete. One, Maker will open probably around the end of December, and Faber is probably early in 2025. So we know that Royal Sun Alliance is one of the anchor tenants in the Maker building. And at the moment, they are interviewing a lot of potential tenants to come into those buildings. But, fantastic views across Riverside Park, the sea and the river itself. It's offering somewhere in the region of 150,000 square foot of high quality office space. Next slide, please. So going slightly across the road, we have what is our central business district. This is High Street West. So this is currently what is our city centre, and basically where there are shops. It's been hollowed out. We've got lots of empty units. We're trying to retain businesses within there and sort of some of the high street brands. But anybody who knows city centres, it really, really struggles to keep that occupancy. So one of the things that we're now doing is sort of, acquiring buildings as businesses are moving out, so we can repurpose, or we actually demolish and redesign and rebuild in that area. Next slide, please. The Keel Square, opposite where the City Hall is. This is a sort of public area that's been reactivated. So you can see there it's got fountains. As I show you the next couple of slides, you'll see how we've activated that area to give it sort of like a central feel to the city centre. Next slide, please. So part of that was to create a new hotel within the city. This was delivered by the Cairn Group, and it opened in early 2023. So it's a 3-star hotel, probably one of the busiest Holiday Inns in the country at the moment. But again, it has taken off really, really well. It's quite often full. But below Keele Square Hotel is actually for high quality sort of, well, high end food and beverage provision, and that helps to activate that the Keele Square that I just showed you there as well. So that means, you know, they've got, you know, their chairs and things out at the front where people can sit and enjoy sort of the activities that take place in the square. Next slide, please. Culture House is just currently being built, due to open in 2025. It's our new digital immersive hub with a new city centre library, but it also has a range of learning and creating environments and encouraging really a lot more of our community engagement. So again, a lot of digital 5G sort of enabled technology in there as well. You can see from the right-hand picture, those pictures can actually change, and you know, with the seasons, with the times, and depending what activities are taking place within Culture House itself. But we're really excited to see that one open in the city centre. Next slide, please. This is a temporary construction that we're doing. It's actually just opened this week with the turning on of the Christmas lights. And this is Expo Pavilion. So we've been running Expo now for the last 2 years, and events have been taking place within the city to really sort of showcase the best of what we do. So this has a really sort of large immersive screen that publicises and showcases that, but underneath you will see that there is a transparent building, and that is really giving people an idea and showing them of what a city of the future really looks like, how homes could be powered in the future, how we could use immersive technologies and other types of technologies recyclable in homes across the city. Next slide, please. One of the things that we also did was the NHS, there is an eye hospital in Sunderland, but was coming towards the end of its life and was restricted inside. So next to City Hall and next to the bulk housing is being built the new eye hospital. And this is actually a reprovision, but it'll be a national centre for excellence in the country for ophthalmology. I'll get that word right. Next slide, please. I'm going to hop back across to Sheepfolds, across the north of the river. This was privately invested and is our new sort of, it's a destination in its own right, very high-end sort of food and beverage, opened in August, and it was restoring the old railway horse stable, so it was repurposed building, and it's actually sort of kept a lot of the old features within there, but an amazing, if you do get a chance, an amazing sort of destination to go to. You may be aware of the Hairy Bikers. Cy King is actually one of the tenants there as well and has his own restaurant there. A little bit of plug for him. Next slide, please. And HICSA is our Housing and Innovation Construction Skills Academy. Again, really excited to see this one come forward, partially funded by LUF, to create that new Innovation Construction and Skills Academy in partnership with Sunderland College and Moby. Anybody watching LinkedIn, if you do subscribe, then there's new announcements being made in terms of new partners coming on board with that, but also the new programme. It opens in 2025 for the new education year, and quite an exciting programme that's coming ahead. We really wanted to do this because this is about promoting the development and practical application of modern methods of construction, retrofit, use of sustainability and smart technology. It's about equipping our young people with the essential skills for the future. We know there's gaps in the construction market around the new technologies that we're using, so this is really great to see this come forward and really support the construction and, you know, the carbon reductions that we're trying to achieve. Next slide, please. British esports, for anybody who knows about esports, I didn't know a lot about this originally, but again, this is a massively growing sport that's part of the Olympics going forward. This will be the national HQ on Sheepfolds, and it's a repurposed Audi garage. You probably see by the look of it, it's an Audi garage. It links really to Performance Hub that we have in the city, which is our gaming houses, extremely popular with young people. And again, this will be a national sort of hub that which should attract, you know, quite a lot of attention within Sunderland, given it's an absolutely growing massive industry around the gaming industry. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm trying to rattle through this because quite a bit, but I'm coming to the end, so bear with me. St Mary's Boulevard, I talked earlier about how the communities wanted to make sure that there's a real connection between sort of, the Riverside Sunderland and the city itself. And at the moment, we've got a vast sort of dual carriageway that sort of segregates the city a little bit. So we are undertaking some transport movement strategies at the moment and looking to reduce the sort of carriageway a little bit so that it does become more of a usable boulevard, that we can bring the communities out within the streets, create the businesses that actually activate those areas and enjoy, all of the activities that are taking place around St Mary's. Next slide, please. So this is the bit that is absolutely critical infrastructure for the city centre, and that is about bridging the north and south of the cities, across the river. So this is a 260-metre pedestrian crossing for cycling use as well. It's 30 metres above the river, so quite high, in case anybody's got vertigo. But really essential in terms of linking that footpath between sort of Riverside, Sunderland and the city back to the Stadium of Light. And again, it's making sure that there's high quality public realm there. It really attracts, but again, it makes sure that we, in terms of transport links, the only crossing we've got at the moment is the Wearmouth Bridge, which is a vehicular access, and again, it's quite a desolate place to go across. So this is a fantastic sort of addition to the city that will really activate as well. Okay, next. And again, I talked earlier about keeping cars to the periphery of Riverside, Sunderland. Again, we're trying to cut down that sort of vehicular access in terms of making use of walking, cycling, healthy outcomes. So Riverside multi-storey car park is the latest. It opened last year now, just before the concerts of Beyonce and Pink, which was really helpful. But it encases a lot of smart technology, EV charging, has living walls, over 600 spaces, which will essentially support all of the new business on Riverside and the new residential areas as well, keeping parking. But it's an absolutely striking design on the city skyline, as you see from the photograph there, the lights going up and things, and we managed to illuminate it for both Pink and Beyonce as well, which I'm sure they were very grateful for. Next slide, please. And Riverside Park itself, I touched on that great big green space that sits within Riverside. It's 13 hectares of space. It's quite substantial. So we're currently out to tender for a number of the plots in there to really open this up to the community, because this is providing significant ecological and bionet gain in terms of our developments there. So it really, what we wanted to do is to make sure that we activate a massive space, not only for Riverside Sunderland, but for Sunderland itself. So it's supporting active, healthy lifestyles, eating, and particularly to what you can see at the top right-hand side there is what's known as Kingsley Gardens, and that's going to be a massive sort of community allotment where we'd encourage residents to grow food, to look after food, and really engage in the new communities that are being created across Riverside. And last slide, please. So it's all about creating a carbon neutral urban quarter in the heart of Sunderland. We're looking to make sure HICSA itself is helping us do that in terms of our urban design, how we can use modern methods of construction, how we can look to reduce sort of energy consumption. We're looking at district heat networks, microgrids, zero bills, but how can we address sort of some of the issues that we have around sort of fuel poverty, etc. So it's quite an exciting time in Sunderland. The skyline is full of cranes. I would invite you to come down and have a look, but I hope that gives you an insight to some of the stuff that we're actually doing at the moment. And thank you for listening.
Thanks, Julie, for that. I really, really appreciate it. It was wonderful to see everything that you're doing there. I know that we're running a little bit behind time, and I know that Ariane has got some really good slides. So I'm just going to say my name's Joanne Bartholomew. I'm the privilege of being Director for Development at Kirklees Council. Kirklees isn't a place that particular people identify with, and it is actually a way that we govern a set of unique places with their own identity. So one of the things that I was going to talk about, but I will pick up some questions. I'll skip my conversation and I'll pick up some questions in the chat session, is how you foster a sense of identity around places for people, for those places that we have now and those places that are yet to come. And importantly, how do you do that 10-year blind? So with no reference to the type of accommodation or the type of tenure that people live in. So ideally that we put those people first in terms of shaping the community they live in and the communities that they go to, such as town centres, interactive travel. But what I will do now is I will pass over to Ariane because she has a number of slides.
Morning, and thanks to all the previous speakers. That first slide introduces me, and if we can swiftly go in, hopefully talking about a partnership that we're doing, very locally based, but very important for the communities that we have in Preston. That's the name of our partnership. The background, and I'm sure lots of people will be familiar with this, that tells you how many empty properties we've got in Preston, and that equates to about 1 in 21 of the homes in Preston are currently classed as empty. Goes without saying that in particular those empty properties, they blight neighbourhoods, they generate complaints to the council, to other local agencies. They become a focus for vandalism, antisocial behaviour, and also, and that's a conservative estimate, you know, they can cost the owners of those properties up to £8,000 a year. Absolute madness. Why would you leave a resource like that empty when we've got such a severe housing shortage? Next slide, please. That just gives you some figures in terms of the local weight for housing in Preston. Again, I'm sure that that's very familiar to colleagues elsewhere across the country, but there's a real need for us to do something to bring those empty homes back into use. Next slide, please. How did we get started on our project? Essentially, it started as a political commitment in response to the national planning policy framework that requires affordable housing to be provided. For us as a council, we decided to try and do that by using some of the commuted sums, which is essentially a planning source of income. It's a Section 106 funding. And we put a policy in place that a proportion of that Section 106 funding had to go into affordable housing as an off-site commuted sum. So the council decided politically to put that into affordable housing and also to bring empty homes back into use. But crucially, we had no additional capacity or indeed funding to deliver a scheme or manage any of the housing once occupied. So we prepared a scope to procure and appoint a partner to do this, and that resulted in Community Gateway Association being appointed back in 2018. They're Preston's largest registered provider, just short of around 7,000 properties, but crucially for us, they've got a really strong local presence. They're the RP that took on the stock transfer from the local authority, so they've got a really strong track record, and crucially, they've got a good reputation in our communities as well. Next slide, please. So essentially, Making Homes from Houses, which is the name of our project, aims to advise, support and get owners to bring the properties back into use, principally by purchasing them, although in some exceptional circumstances, we have offered a 10 or 15 year repair and lease arrangement. The key to this is CGA being the delivery partner, which means that once purchased or leased, that those homes are rented out at an affordable rent for the foreseeable future. So it basically ticks the boxes that the council wanted to achieve. It's about bringing empty homes back into use, but it's also about increasing the supply locally of affordable housing. Tenants for the properties come from direct nominations from our waiting list at the council, and it does give priority to those who are particularly at risk or have been homeless. And for us, as I said, crucially, our local communities know and trust Community Gateway. So not only is it meeting that local housing need, there's that high level of trust that Community Gateway manage the properties and also the tenants to very high standards. Next slide, please. As I say, they're well established. The advantages for us are that they've got the experience, the internal infrastructure, and the ability to take the process right through from an initial appraisal, acquiring the property, repairing it, and managing it, crucially, once it's tenanted, and that's done alongside its existing portfolio. The fact that CGA are already a member of the Council's Select Move accredited scheme for housing allocations means that literally tenants can be placed within those properties within days of the refurbishment being completed. Shortly before the refurb is completed, the property receives nominations from our waiting list. So literally the turnaround can be really, really quick. It's very, very cost effective. The council, as I said, has no funding to bring empty properties back into use, but using the Section 106 commuted sums, our contribution is around 20k per property, plus a small monthly fee that Community Gateway draw down for my time and the other staffing time. The remainder of the purchase and the refurbishment costs are met principally by Community Gateway, but also the Homes England Affordable Housing Fund as well. And I've got to be honest, if it wasn't for that Homes England support, the scheme wouldn't stack up financially. So it's a really, really important three-way partnership. Next slide, please. Those are our achievements. We're not talking about hundreds or thousands of properties here. Small is beautiful, and it's certainly quality, not quantity. But we're now in the third phase of the project because we exceeded our year one targets. The properties are located across Preston, and that's really important to Community Gateway because it means they've got a more diverse stock base, and it's more attractive for people who might want to live in different areas of the city. But I think it's very telling that of the properties that we've acquired, they'd been empty for a total of 228 years. And that's an average of 4.5 years per property. Obviously some empty less, but some for considerably longer. 45 of those properties are now occupied, and they are the new homes, and the others are just waiting for the tenants to sign up or in the refurbishment process. We've got another stream of properties undergoing appraisal and negotiation to purchase, but crucially for us, properties that are surveyed and not viable for inclusion for various reasons. My Empty Homes team monitor those until they are reoccupied. So it does raise the profile with owners of empty properties, but crucially as well, communities see action. So it's very visible that those properties are being monitored, and that both Community Gateway and also the council are taking action, for those particular communities. I put a compliment. We get lots of compliments from all sorts of people, but I think this one summarised really, really nicely how important it is to local people that those properties are reoccupied, and also that they are meeting our local housing needs as well. Last one, please. Those are the conclusions, and really it's a win-win. I can't see any disadvantages. Certainly for us, it's worked very, very well, and moving into that third phase. But it's also been recognised at national level. The National Empty Homes Network awarded us the Best Partnership Award. Last slide, that just gives you a breakdown of the funding that the council have committed. And again, I would repeat, there is absolutely no way that the council, if we were building new houses, could have provided 45 new homes for that level of funding. No way at all that we could have done that. And it's also cost effective for the other two partners as well. So I think that's the beauty of the scheme. It's partnership in action at very grassroots level. So last slide. That's my contact details. The development manager at Community Gateway is Stephen Galbraith. If there are RP colleagues that need to find some, have some specific questions for Stephen. And as I say, it's a win-win. It's a no-brainer for us. As far as I'm aware, we're the only local authority in the whole of England that are using commuted sums to bring empty properties back into use like this. I've shared the information with lots of colleagues. By all means, you know, get in touch if you need any more information, but I can highly recommend it, and more to the point, it serves a really, very valuable service in our local community as well. So that's it for us, and over to Lisa for the Q&A, I believe now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And if all our presenters could come back on screen, and apologies that we've gone over time, but I think you'll all agree they've been really fascinating presentations and some really good case study examples there. Because we're a bit over on time, we are going to stay on a little bit longer just to take a couple of questions, and just to let everybody know, we've shared our closing polls already in the chat. So if people can just have a quick look at those before they leave as well. I can see already that in understanding of the topic has increased a good overall at 87% good so far, so that's really good. Thank you, everybody, and do please put in some ideas for future topics, because they're always really useful to us. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions before we go for anyone that is able to stay on the call, and I'm going to try and link some of the most popular questions together to just kind of do a bit of a summary. So the first sort of set of questions really are around resident participation. So we had a popular question around how the residents were selected for participation in the workshops, and sort of linked to that a couple of questions around how easy it is to get communities involved. I think Natalie had some comments on that, as well as yourself, Liam, and also around perhaps whether you've provided any incentives to get community engagement to increase. So Liam, I think, do you want to come in first on that?
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of how participants were selected, I think there's principles that can relate to sort of engagement more generally. But the NHC was previously involved in a piece of work, the Social Housing Tenants Climate Jury. So that was our introduction to the concept of citizens' juries and deliberative democracy. And we tried our best to take those principles in how participants were selected in this sense. So in terms of areas, that was kind of led by, we wanted the different typologies, but we were led by the partners and how we got those on board. So that was the location, but within that, it was commitments to sort of being as representative and inclusive as possible, but then also offering compensation as well. So our partners involved sent a sizable amount of invitations out to households in their areas around with a range of communications to try and get a good amount of people submitting their interest to be involved in the project. From there was an element of sortition to try and get a group as representative as what we knew about the demographics of those areas as possible. Inclusivity in the sense of ensuring accessibility, people understanding that we wanted their views, they didn't need any prior knowledge. We've done online things before where we provided sort of Wi-Fi dongles or laptops to make sure they could take part as well. But then also that final point is their views were valued and their time wasn't free. So we compensated all participants in the work, and where possible offered transport costs and childcare costs as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Natalie, did you want to come in on that, or anyone else on that one?
No, I think we sort of followed on from what Liam's just mentioned there, some Brilliant. Of the points that he's just made. I don't know if Tom's got anything further.
Yeah, just happy to touch on the, I've dropped a follow-on response in the chat as well, but just in terms of difficulty engaging with customers and or incentives, and yet yes, that there are always kind of certain groups of customers that we find it more difficult to engage with. The priority for us is making sure we have representative voice as far as possible across our engagement activity, and that we're making sure that we are capturing the views of kind of the various customer segments that we have. I guess what we would never want to do is kind of force engagement on customers. It needs to be customer choice. So it's about providing meaningful opportunities for customers who want to engage with us to engage, and using appropriate rewards, incentives or recognition to do that. I've dropped in the chat, we've actually produced a recognition, rewards and incentives framework. We define what each of those are. They are different things, and in what circumstances each are applicable. So, and that includes everything from our customer scrutiny panel to customer surveys to customer focus groups and so forth. And there's a whole range of things that we potentially do. They're different for every group, and it's about, are you trying to produce a lever to incentivize somebody to get involved in the first place? Are you trying to recognize kind of ongoing involvement, or are you trying to sustain ongoing involvement over a shorter period? But it includes a range of things, including shopping vouchers, access to prize draws, etc. In some cases, and I think we're probably all increasingly finding, one of the most important things is just feeding back, making customers feel that and recognizing that their voice has been listened to and is informing service delivery, and it is informing changes to what we're doing. And the more we do that, the more likely people are to continue engaging. So that's a really key part as well. But happy to share more outside of this if it's useful to anyone.
That's great, thank you. And just maybe just a couple more linked questions if I can ask these. So I think the first one perhaps for Julie, which is around how did you make sure new developments feel owned by existing communities? And then another one perhaps sort of on a similar vein for you, Joanne, around culture and encouraging that local sense of pride and identity. Julie, do you want to come in first?
So I was just making sure my mic was on. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's what we're doing is very, very visible. It can really be seen sort of across the city, and I think, you know, we've maximised use of sort of social media. The new screens that have gone up within the city centre are really sort of helping to promote what we're doing across the city centre. And how people can engage in that. But we've got something called the BID, which is the business, I'm trying to remember the name of it now, but anyway, it really unites all of the Sunderland businesses as well, who help to sort of promote a lot of what we're doing. So they promote it with the businesses themselves, promote it with residents who access those businesses. So we've got quite strong engagement across the city that we would sort of make sure that people are aware of what we're doing and how they can get involved in that as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Joanne, did you want to come in?
Thanks, I will, if you don't mind coming on the culture. And Julie's giving me a brilliant segue in with the BID. So we have a BID as well, a business improvement district, and I'm glad that that I had a little bit of time to think about what the acronym meant there, Julie. I find that culture is a really difficult one when it comes to this subject matter. When we had conversations with communities and people around their home and the place they live, and the place they feel a sense of belonging, there's a real juxtaposition between wanting to visit a place that gives them an experience and wanting the place where they live to feel safe, particularly in the time of austerity that we face now and financial difficulties for us as a council and for all of our partners. So one of the things that we've had to work really hard about is making sure that some of our large scale investments, and at the moment we've got a significant investment, the same as Julie has, in a hotel. We continue to support the local theatre. We continue to support the BID in Huddersfield around having cultural and event-led experiences that are free and accessible to all, and putting culture as being not a destination, but a thing and a theme that you do into everything. But what I would say that it's very hard at the moment to ensure that everybody feels that it's for them. When some of our communities are struggling with the whole carbon issue, net zero, and what that has and the impact on their bills. And it's one that, if it wasn't for the fact that we're leveraging in a considerable amount of external funding, I think we would find that message really difficult at the moment.
Thank you, and I'm aware we are sort of significantly over time, so I think we'll have to wrap there with the questions, but we will leave the chat open and go back and answer some more questions in the chat, and I can see that we've already answered a few of them in the chat as well. So thank you all. Just for me to wrap up and say thank you all for attending. Thank you to all our presenters today. I think it's been a really fascinating session, and I can already see lots of ideas for future learning programme sessions coming in, which is always really good news for me. So thank you everybody for your time, and then look forward to seeing some of you on future calls. Thank you very much.